persecutors are born. Resistance is futile. Your life, as it has been, is over. From this time forward, you will service us.
Earlier in the 2016 election cycle, Ben Shapiro wrote at dailywire.com that the problem with Donald Trump would be the perversion of conservatism into well, National Socialism, Trumpism. Here's how he put it at National Review, quote, and I'm sure, discussed this in a video at the time. Barack Obama has taken America toward a cliff at 100 miles per hour. Hillary Clinton will press the accelerator further so that we'll be moving at 120 miles per hour. Trump would presumably press the accelerator only slightly so that we'd be cruising toward that cliff at 110 miles per hour. The difference is that Trump will force his conservative passengers to rip out the reverse gear in order to justify him. Conservatism will become National Socialist Trumpism. Conservatives will prioritize winning over truth. Trump asks for something more: your political soul. There was ample evidence during the election that this would happen. With each new Trump heresy against decency and conservatism, conservatives, or rather cuck-servatives, solidified in their support of him rather than dropping away. As was detailed in September, Republicans had shifted their views on Russian dictator Vladimir Putin as well as on free trade in order to bow down to Trump. That could at least be justified by pointing to the alternative. Well, it really couldn't, but let's work with me here. Many cuck-servatives felt they had to vote for Trump to stop Hillary. Presumably after the election, Republicans would hold Trump accountable to principle. That's pretty good. But now we're post-election. Hillary is no longer in the picture, and the soul-sucking machine has grown stronger anyway. Here are some rather disquieting poll results. I believe I discussed these last week in a preceding video. Here on the Hard Starboard Radio channel, your conservative Ronin. Like, share, subscribe, learn it, live it, love it. It's the best thing going today. Fully 57% of Republicans answered agree to the statement, the free market has been sorting the economy out and America's been losing. In other words, over half of Republicans are now anti-free market. What's another word for anti-free market? Socialist! "69% of Republicans say that it is acceptable for the president and vice president to directly negotiate with private businesses, which is definitional economic corporatism." In other words, over 2/3 of Republicans are now just fine with crony capitalism as long as it goes to their cronies. 78%, almost 4 out of 5, say they're fine with Trump and Cuck Pence offering tax breaks or incentives to individual companies to keep jobs in the U.S. where they don't belong if the invisible hand says they should be outsourced. You know, it's real easy. You want to keep more jobs in the U.S. and create more jobs in the U.S., reduce the cost of job creation. Cut the corporate tax rate. Deregulate the economy. Basically, roll back Obamonomics. And all of that will follow. Instead, we get the same corrupt economic corporatism, crony capitalism, in which Barack Obama engaged so promiscuously. It's just the identity of the recipient constituencies will be different, but otherwise it's the same thing. Mindless tribalism, this is what I'm talking about. 71% signed off on Trump and Cuck Pence offering government contracts to individual companies to keep jobs in the U.S., which is Obama-esque stimulus, in addition to crony corporatism. 75% said they were fine with Trump and Cuck Pence negotiating with individual private companies on a case-by-case basis. Oh, that's efficient. You know, you don't do it case by case. You govern macroeconomically, not microeconomically. You change the parameters to a more favorable economic direction for everybody. Everybody, not just individual companies. That is the epitome of corruption. The very same corruption against which a lot of Trump supporters have railed for 8 years coming from Barack Obama, but now just fine if it benefits them. Now that they have their own dictator. This is the destruction of free market allegiance in favor of economic tyranny. All because the person in office is named Trump, not Obama or Clinton. And Trump continues to push these messages. In his interview with Time magazine, he called for more economic fascism as well as government stimulus. And Senator Ted Cruz, oh my God, Ted Cruz, Mr. Tea Party warrior himself, a fellow who used to oppose corporatism, so much that he once campaigned against ethanol in Iowa, now says that the corrupt carrier cramdown is wonderful. As Jim Petticokas of American Enterprise Institute tweeted, we are all National Socialists now. No, we're not. Not here. But the soul suck doesn't stop there. Republicans are now embracing revenge politics. And Trumpism is nothing if not revenge. The notion that the president should use the executive branch to punish Trump supporters' enemies. In other words, use the executive branch to punish the left. Avenge themselves. Pay them back for the Obama years. Yeah, that's nice and unifying. We still don't know what prompted Trump to tweet out that he wanted to cancel the Air Force One contract with Boeing, but it's a pretty solid theory that he saw negative comments about his trade policies from Boeing's CEO. Again, you Trump supporters, you think that Trump is going to fight for what you want? Bullshit. He's going to fight for himself. He could care less what you want. The only circumstances in which he will fight for anything you want is when it happens to line up with his own ego. Here's another theory from Rush Limbaugh. Here's the story of Boeing and the Clintons. In 2010, 2 months after Hillary went to Moscow to broker a $3.7 billion trade deal with Russia, Boeing announced a $900,000 contribution to the Clinton Foundation. Trump is very much aware of all this, and he wants that contribution alike and larger contributions going to the Trump Foundation. You know it's true. I mean, this used to be considered bad politics, bad policy, and immorality. Now, all of those things are defined tribalistically. If it benefits your side, it's wonderful. If the other side does it, it's bad politics, bad policy, and immoral. And where are principles? Where are conservative principles in all this? Where's the Constitution in all this? Nowhere to be found. Which is why never Trumpers never supported Donald Trump. It's not about the tribe. It's about principles. And now the tribe is no longer a vehicle for our principles, so that's why we're not Republicans anymore. Simple as that. Finally, appearance of corruption appears to be hunky-dory so long as the name is Trump and not Clinton. During the campaign, Republicans ripped Hillary Clinton for her corrupt ties to the Clinton Foundation while serving as Commissar of State. But now the new president-elect has serious business ties to multiple countries around the world through his businesses, and that's no big deal somehow. Here's Speaker of the House Paul Ryan, quote, "This is not what I'm concerned about in Congress," close quote. How convenient. If you're a sports fan, such thinking isn't foreign. Ben Shapiro's a White Sox fan, and he remembers hating former catcher A.J. Pierzynski when he was on the Minnesota Twins, but he loved him when he was on the Sox. He was willing to break every rule, do anything to win, and Shapiro thought it was awesome. But politics isn't sports. Principles still matter, since what we demand of our government isn't some vague definition of winning, but that the government not invade our rights. If we change our demands based on the person in office, we'll end up with a government that merely shifts between tyrants approved by Republicans and tyrants approved by Democrats. And the tyranny will never stop. Just yesterday, Newt Gingrich unveiled his newest speech, The Principles of Trumpism, at the Heritage Foundation. Gingrich, who used to provide intellectual heft to conservative ideas, now lends his brains to providing an ad hoc political movement with the veneer of philosophy, at an elevated speaking cost, of course. So, what are the principles of Trumpism? Opposing political correctness, or rather just redirecting it. Saying Merry Christmas and protectionism and permanent economic calamity, among others. But mainly the principles of Trumpism are the attitudes of Trumpism. Populist rabble-rousing in the tradition of Washington, Jefferson, Jackson, Lincoln, Theodore Roosevelt, FDR, and Ronald Reagan, Gingrich said. And by that I mean in every case they believed in the American people, they aroused the American people, and they led the American people to victory over entrenched powerful interests. Sounds vaguely leftist, doesn't it? See, Gingrich never bothered to mention a few things, though. Like, for example, that Andrew Jackson was an ambitious demagogue who cared little about legal restrictions on his power, used the spoils system to punish his enemies and reward his friends, and was the first president to strike the first blow against the United States Constitution. Remember, for those of you out there who think that Lincoln was a terrible president because the states had the South, the Confederate States had every right to secede from the country, and I'm not disagreeing with that. But Andrew Jackson he favored holding the states in the Union by whatever means necessary. So if you hate Abraham Lincoln for doing that, but you love Andrew Jackson, well, then you ought to love Abraham Lincoln, too. I mean, in a lot of ways, Andrew Jackson was a tyrant. In point of fact, Teddy Roosevelt was a progressive who massively expanded the reach and power of the federal government. FDR destroyed the very notion of limited government in the United States and ruled from on high using the might of the federal government. All of this falls within the vast rubric of populism as well, Trump supporters. Everything you claim to oppose can be given a populist veneer as well. Populism, Trumpism, is no ism at all. It's emotion. It is rage. It is anger. And anger is not an ideology. It is not a philosophy. It can be turned against you just as easily as you turned it against the other side. What matters is, what do you stand for? The last great Democrat president was Grover Cleveland, the 22nd and 24th president of the United States. And he once said, what is the use of winning election, winning elective office, holding elective office if you don't stand for something? And you people and your Cheeto-dusted Jesus figure, you don't stand for anything. That's the problem. If we are to take Gingrich seriously, the main principle of Trumpism is this: say whatever you can and whatever you have to win popularity, or bilk your way to popularity, then use whatever power you get from it to do whatever the hell you want. Law and Constitution be damned. And Republicans defend all this. The supposed conservative thought, or rather conservative thought leaders, Douglas V. Gibbs used this argument all the time. Wow, we gotta stop Hillary, but when we get Trump in there, we can surround him with conservatives who will steer him in the right direction. And I always said that bullshit, dog, is not going to work that way. It's going to work the other way. They will be turned, not Trump. Now, here it is 7 months later, and well, guess what? The supposed conservative thought leaders, who we were told would hem Trump in, have instead knelt before him and unzipped his fly. Vice President-elect Mike Cuck Pence, the man we were promised would limit Trump's anti-conservative heresies, now says the free market has been sorting it out and America's been losing. Speaker of the House Paul Ryan asked about Trump's potential business conflicts, in other words, the scandals that are just waiting to erupt, simply brushed off such concerns. This is not what I'm concerned about in Congress. Well, he's damn well gonna be. And damn well better be if he wants his majority caucus to remain a majority. Ryan has also endorsed Trump's controversial pick of pro-Russian Rex Tillerson as the potential Secretary of State, and he has dismissed questions about Trump's bizarre insistence that 3 million people voted fraudulently for Hillary Clinton. Senator Ted Cruz, who spent the primaries railing against cronyism, now says that the carrier deal, a textbook example of cronyism, is great politics. I think the American people are gratified to have an incoming president and incoming administration that will fight to keep jobs here in America, no matter how big the government has to get and what dictatorial, tyrannical tactics they have to use to force it. Well, all of this has an impact. We discussed it in the previous segment. 57% of Republicans agree to the statement the free market has been sorting the economy out and America's been losing. 69% of Republicans say that it is acceptable for the president and vice president to directly negotiate with private businesses, which is definitional economic corporatism. 78% say they're fine with Trump and Cuck Pence offering tax breaks or incentives to individual companies to keep the jobs in the U.S. Still more crony capitalism. 71% signed off on Trump and Cuck Pence offering government contracts to individual companies to keep jobs in the U.S. Bribes, in other words, which is Obama-esque stimulus. 75% said they were fine with Trump and Cuck Pence negotiating with individual private companies on a case-by-case basis instead of changing economic policy to a more market-friendly orientation for everybody. That's what a capitalist would do. Trump is not a capitalist. I remember my last days on Constitution Radio when when Freudian slip there, when Douglas V. Gibbs and Alex Ferguson would say, well, at least Trump's a capitalist. And I said, no, he's not. Unless you think George Soros is a capitalist. You're a crony capitalist. He's corrupt. He's no capitalist ideologue. He doesn't care about free markets. All he cares about is look out for number one. And here we are 7 months later. One more see I told you so, Doug and Alex. Meanwhile, Republican after Republican, Republican after Republican, has signaled willingness to go along with Trumpian foreign policy, which seems heavily reliant on selling out to Vladimir Putin. I had one Trump supporter on Facebook just the other day, just yesterday as a matter of fact. He knows who he is. Claim that there's no comparison. We've got to fight Red China, but we need to embrace Vladimir Putin and the Russians. I just Googled, I did a Google search, and I found 3 or 4 different links of a very recent, like within the past couple of weeks, Sino-Russian summit meeting, where Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping were all over each other. The bromance of which Donald Trump is most jealous. I pointed out to this Trump supporter, the Russians and the Red Chinese are close allies. To say that we should be irredeemably hostile to one and slobberingly friendly to the other makes no sense whatsoever. It's insane. It's crazy. It's irrational. They're 2 peas in a pod. They're allies. You mean, the logic of it is you either embrace both of them, in which case you're selling out to both of them, or you oppose both of them, because both of them see the United States as an obstacle to their global ambitions and therefore an enemy. And for 8 years, Barack Obama has just been retreating, bending over, grabbing the ankles. Now here's Donald Trump pretty much doing the same thing with one of them. There's another Trump supporter that loves Trump's isolationism because he said, hey, we should just leave Syria to the Russians. Well, Barack Obama already did that 3 years ago. Well, Trump's going to fight jihadists. Oh, he is? I found it. All I did, this is not really complicated. All I did is do a Google search. And I found an article that explained in clear black and white that we can't fight jihadists in Syria without provoking the Russians. We can't fight Al-Qaeda al-Nusra. We can't fight the Islamic State in Syria without provoking the Russians. Oh, the Russians are our allies again. No, they're not. Whatever issues the Russians have with the Islamic State, with Al-Qaeda, that doesn't make common cause with us. Putin's trying to use ISIS against us. I mean, if you have been observing the last 2 years of Russian military operations in Syria, what have you seen? I'll tell you what you've seen. You've seen the Russians leave ISIS alone. The only military operations that the Russians have been pursuing has been against the so-called moderate Syrian rebels. They're not fighting Al-Qaeda. They're not fighting ISIS. They're not fighting the global jihad. The Russians are simply propping up their client, Bashar al-Assad, and his Iranian patrons in order to expand Russian, sphere of Russian influence throughout the Middle East. Replace us. That's not good! But Trump supporters are they're like leftists. They won't listen. They have their irrational point of view, and they won't listen to reason. And it goes to Capitol Hill, too. I mean, Republican after Republican has signaled willingness to go along with Trumpian foreign policy, which seems heavily reliant on Putin-philia. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, who once called Putin an adversary, now says he'll support Tillerson. Sean Hannity rails against anyone who would dare question Putin-backed hacks of the Democrat National Committee, stating that such questions show what? Insufficient loyalty to Trump. And if there's a human being on the face of this planet who is less worthy of loyalty, it is Donald J. Trump. Mindless tribalism. It's amazing I was a Republican for 36 years. It's amazing. But then, like I said in a video last week, Barack Obama fundamentally transformed his party. He fundamentally transformed the country. And now, with the rise of Trump mania, Barack Obama has fundamentally transformed the Republican Party as well. The Republican Party is a carbon copy of the Democrats now. Both socialist, both statist, both tyrannical, both personality cults and dictatorship, wannabe dictatorships. So what's the point of all this? During the election cycle, one could make the argument, I heard it frequently enough, that all criticism of Trump had to be silenced in order to prevent Hillary's election, even though Trump is just like her. A single word critical of Trump could turn a vote. That vote could prevent Trump from being elected, which would not have been a bad thing. In fact, as I've said it before, if you look at the big picture, 4 years of Hillary Clinton could buy a generation of conservative Republican rule. But 4 years of Trump will destroy the Republican Party and the conservative movement right along with it. In the biggest of big pictures, Hillary winning would have been the lesser of two evils. But that ship has sailed too. I didn't buy that logic because my job wasn't to get Trump elected. It was to call events and facts according to the dictates of conservatism, principles, and, of course, the United States Constitution. If Trump didn't want my criticism, he had an easy solution. He could stop saying anti-conservative things. But at least there was a utilitarian argument for shut up, cuck. And now there isn't. Trump is the president-elect. He won. Hillary Clinton is off wandering through the woods like Sasquatch. Apparently becoming a roaring alcoholic in the process. Now would be the time to call out Trump's heresies if conservatives weren't lying when they said they'd hold his feet to the fire, and that's not happening. They're not holding his feet to the fire. They're becoming just like him. The centrifugal pull of tribalism is not an unmixed blessing. Now, there are two possible explanations for conservatives falling in line behind Trump's bad ideas. First, we could be in the post-coital glow. Trump's victory has created a halo effect that makes it easier to simply shout, MAGA! in ecstasy instead of looking at policy. Criticism seems like a damp blanket during a time of celebration. Nobody likes a party pooper, which makes party pooping so much fun, actually, in this case. Second, we could be seeing a tactical attempt by many Republican leaders, which is foolish because it didn't work during the campaign, it ain't going to work now, to flatter Trump into conservatism. Emotional bribery, in essence. An attempt to perhaps to mold and manipulate his ego. That seems to be Paul Ryan's tactic. Praise Trump to the skies and hope he treats Ryan the same way he treats Putin. But this tactic is bound to fail. Trump lets flattery work on him only if he has an underlying kinship with the flatterer. Otherwise, he treats flattery as weakness. Mitt Romney tried to flatter Trump, and Trump instead treated him as a penitent Ned Stark, chopping off his head to the delight of the passengers on the Joffrey train. Ted Cruz did the same, and he got left out in the cold. In other words, they got screwed, used and screwed like $3 whores, which is entirely predictable, which is why I don't bother. I don't know, especially Romney. Why did he bother with that? Why did he bother with that? Trump was never going to have anything to do with Mitt Romney. He was never going to make Mitt Romney a Secretary of State. It was like sport fishing with power saws. It was like pulling the wings off of flies. It was like a cat batting a mouse around before eating it. Trump is fine with Putin's flattery because he admires Putin's strong-like bull style. He's not so hot on Chris Christie's sycophancy, cringing analingual bootlicking, instead sending Christie back to Jersey to fetch burgers. If Paul Ryan is delusional enough to believe that his generosity with Trump will earn Trump's support on entitlement reform, he's about to be rudely awakened. And he should not have to be awakened in the first place. Wind this back 5 months ago. Wind this back 5 months ago to the Trump convention in Cleveland when the party leadership had the opportunity to say, no, Trump is not going to be the nominee of this party. We are going to nominate somebody else in his place, and to hell with all of you Trump supporters. That's what they should have done, but they didn't, and now this is where we are, or this is where they are. The illusion of conservative unity behind Trump will help Trump effect a soul suck of the movement itself, like a vampire. Trump will consolidate his gains and then do whatever the hell he wants. And all those conservatives will go, yeah! Even as they cheer for and back a president who is indistinguishable from Barack Hussein Obama. Or what Hillary Clinton would have been. After all, that's the actual principle of National Socialist Trumpism. What's best for Trump is the only principle. Look out for number one.